Welcome to Consent Dojo. Here we are with an opportunity to explore and build our consent muscles. This started sometime during the pandemic when a website asked me to teach consent. And I'm like, you know what? Consent is such a nuanced thing that I can't just teach it. We have to explore it. We have to work at it. It's like going to the gym. We have to have a daily habit of it because consent, it's not just a kink thing. It's not just a sex thing. It's a human thing. We are social animals. We're incredibly complicated. Oh my God. And I don't know about you, Dan, but there are days when I could just be an non-social, like an orangutan, be off in the forest and ignore all my other, fellow primates. But no, I'm a human being, so I'm social, and consent is, well, part of how we make good society. Also, hot kink. So we gather in Consent Dojo to look at consent from all sorts of different angles, and it has been my pleasure. And I also want to thank my Patreon, because without Patreon support, I wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you. And I hope that you'll drop by my Patreon for all of you Patreon people. Thank you. I have the privilege of knowing some amazing people in my life. And I lure them onto my show after I find out the secrets and the dirty truth of their lives to share with you. Now, many of you might know Danarama from the classes that he teaches, but we're not having a class today. We are having confessions. If I can get it out of him. Think I can get it out of him? I don't know. I'm going to try. I'm going to see if I can get some sordid realities and gossip and, oh, the drama of being a professional kink performer. Let's see if we can find out some things. But before we go further, let me read the bio. So, a lifestyle dom, performer, and BDSM educator for more than 2 decades. He's been at it obviously since he was 10 then.
Very charitable of you. Thank you.
Danarama has taught at least a million folks how to have better, safer, and more creative sex and BDSM in the dungeon or the bedroom. In addition to directing Kink University, kink.com's educational site, he's the founder of the Two Knotty Boys, co-teaching workshops since 1999 and co-author of two best-selling rope bondage books. He's rigged, directed, and performed in hundreds of instructional and hardcore fetish videos. Danarama continues teaching BDSM in sex intimacy and intimacy classes online and at conferences worldwide. Check out his website at creativebdsm.com. And also, all the other links will be in the chat box or the comment section if you're looking at it live or looking at it later. Okay, now that's the official bio. Okay, so here's my take on Danarama, all right? He's a friend. He is somebody that I adore, somebody with great ethics, deep kindness, amazing dapper style. And, sometimes I'm at those conferences and I'm having one of those like introverted moments. I'm like, poke, 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 text, text, text. Hey, want to go grab some coffee or grab a drink? So he's one of my buddies. Um, yeah. And so I have lured you onto the show. Now, given that I've said all that, hardcore fetish videos. Ooh. And today, in terms of Consent Dojo, I want I want us to explore us meaning me and the viewers, the realities of fetish video directing, performing, and going into it because there's the stuff we see, right? And I know that there's things happening differently to make the fantasy happen. So I'd like to dig into that and how it relates to consent and co-creation, because you and the performer and the crew are co-creating fantasies and images, right? So before we get into this, tell us about, well, what these videos are like. Oh, and also for those of you who might be wondering, no, we're not going to be showing footage. Why? Because this is going on YouTube, y'all. So if you want to see the real deal, follow the links, but paint us a picture, my friend.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Midori, for the wonderful invitation, and thank you all of you for joining us in this talk, which I think is an important talk that I think everyone should be having this type of conversation, especially in the mainstream and vanilla space. And Midori, this is great because you're pretty much trying to think if I have an older friend in the BDSM community, and I mean, a longer friend, and I think you're the winner because even before I think I was officially into the whole kink instruction realm, let alone working for kink, I was we were we were doing performances together down. I think we took a big long road trip together down to the El Rio, I think in Los Angeles for some Mystic Midway show, even before it was the Mystic Midway. Remember that? And together, you and I co-topped the entire uh, cast of the show by grabbing one end of a long rope, each of us, and then basically non-consensually, I do have to admit, which is our first blooper, the entire cast wrapping them up in a circle of rope like a school of fish. That's my memory of that. And so that was an enjoyable time. And then you don't really get to know someone very quickly when you're sharing a a motorhome van for 7 hours driving from San Francisco to LA. And um, that would be that. And it was also a lot of fun since a lot of the cast were very exhibitionist. They were flashing truckers and causing all sorts of mayhem, which is also potentially non-consensual. So it touches on things, and I think that's one of the most important things that I've kind of learned in the scene is that what we assume as consent, particularly as we're growing up uh, in the world of dating and just having friends, um, it's not a natural instinct that people have to obtain, and it probably should be. And so that was like, th those are fun examples. And unfortunately, a lot of the consent violations that happen are the result of things that start out as fun, or at least as one person thinks is fun, and the other person is afraid to admit might not be so fun. So, do you remember those days, Dory?
No,
That was
I'd forgotten about the LA thing. Yeah, wow. Until you mentioned that, boy, the 90s, huh?
yeah. It was that 1990? I think it was 1995 at Theater Arto, or 96. So that's where we're having a rehearsal. But anyway, so the history goes way back, and the beauty of all this is that I think this is true for you, Midori, as well as myself, is that I finally found, I didn't get into this whole thing until I was over 30. I was, I had very shy and lonely 20s and completely uselessly awkward around, uh, around potential partners and anyone that I had a crush on. And that still kind of lingers even to this day. Which I want to come circle back to because I kind of think that that is an element of a positive consent is to kind of, if you start out on a situation where you think you're unworthy of this partner or you're unworthy of this wonderful creature that is there before you and potentially sharing themselves in various respects, uh, going into that feeling that you kind of have to earn that right, I think is a nice positive mindset to have because it's kind of worked for me. It's worked against me in many cases because being shy more often than not in my before I got into the kinky world, I had one girlfriend in my 20s, throughout my 20s. And just because I was so shy. And she was 10 years older than I was. And it was uh, it was an interesting situation because she would drag me to swinger and new age parties and tantra workshops and that sort of thing. And so I really got a fast exposure of being absolutely shy and naive and uh, you know, unbeknownst to my body dysmorphia, I think the best I've ever looked, and then but still felt unworthy to take me into these scenes where I was surrounded by people that were ostensibly making themselves available for intimate contact was quite a shock. And this is even before I got into the kink scene. Um, I got I survived cancer when I was 28, so I lost a year of my life to Hodgkin's lymphoma. And when I came out of that, and I ended up my girlfriend and I ended up breaking up, and I followed a shiny skirt, which is my shiny clothes are my fetish, always have been. I followed one into a goth club, which also turned out to be a BDSM club. And that's how I got started in the scene, is because I found my people and I finally belonged. And that sense of belonging in a community that had its own sort of protocol already in place, as well as an aesthetic, was extremely helpful. And that is something that a lot of people in the mainstream social interaction community don't have.
Hmm.
I mean, if you have no social background in dating, it's very easy to make a lot of mistakes. And I was because I was so shy, I had a tendency of thinking the other person wasn't interested. And so then I wouldn't even kiss on the first date. And then they would get upset with me because they thought that I wasn't interested in them because I didn't make the first move. So that's like a really awkward thing growing up in the because getting the peak of your sexual uh, versioning in the late 80s and early 90s was a an interesting perspective that, like I said, did kind of shape my aspect of consent. And so that's the first thing I kind of want to mention as a lesson that I learned was going into something as though you've got to earn it, that you don't really deserve it. And that's something that has still sort of carried on into my uh, into my life, uh, into porn and into kink and beyond of where I am today. And it still kind of hamstrings me from certain opportunities, but it's probably better that way. People say that, never regret the chances you don't. What is it? What do they say, Midori? What's that mean? Ne don't don't regret the it's better to something like it's better to regret the things that you did than the things that you didn't do, something like that. I'm
You
paraphrasing
mean
that.
better to have loved and lost than not loved at all? Like that?
That's a good quote, but I think it's more
Mhm.
the act that when people talk about taking chances, they say when they talk about regret, it's better to regret the things.
Oh, here it is. You'll regret 100% of the things you never try. Something like that. But Dan, I want to jump towards yeah, I want to
And I
comment.
disagree with. I was going to say that. I just not to interrupt you, but
Oh,
I didn't want to leave that phrase out there because
yeah.
I believe it's the opposite. Because I
Yeah.
think we need to focus on, you know, it's better to. I think it's more regretful to do things and ask for forgiveness than it is to be asking for permission. So as you were saying,
So the reality that a lot of people don't realize is many of us who find ourselves on stage in many different ways, because it's true for my teaching as well, actually have high degree of introversion, shyness, and like the structure that not only kink offers, but enjoys and benefits from the structure of performance. In terms of consent and your work as a professional performer, let's fast forward to when you are, well, making, I guess, performing and producing and coordinating? What was what all did you do in terms of fetish and kink porn?
Okay, well, let's fast forward into my work at Kink. So in 2014, and I was offered a position at Kink to direct the Kink University, which Peter had been trying, who's the CEO of Kink, had been trying to launch and make videos for about 10 years already, or almost 10 years, like 8 or 9 years or so. And no, none of the other directors wanted to direct an educational site because they wanted to get, commissions off of porn clicks and this and that. And so he offered me the opportunity to do an educational site since by that time I'd been teaching uh, work for Two Knotty Boys, and I'd also been, dating someone who was working at Kink at the time and was featured in the upper floor all the time. So I'd go to upper floor parties. So I was known to Peter, and I was known to the directors, and so it was easy for me to slide into that. But when I started, it became again a fast education as to just how porn was shot and how important the negotiations are, all the way down from the contacting of the models and the choice of the models to negotiating with them and their agents as to what they will or will not do. And these are things, as Midori was hinting at, are hidden from the fantasy of uh, BDSM porn or porn in general. Now, Kink, because it was such a large organization or studio in San Francisco, they did things as even more by the book and basically writing the book a lot on what consent in porn should be like in negotiation. So it
Ooh,
wasn't like it was, and
before we
I don't
go
know.
in before we go into that, what's what do people falsely imagine porn and consent be like?
Right. Well, I think most people assume, and this is going from my just talking to other people as well as my own understanding of porn that I've watched for a while, uh, from the time I was from the time of my 18th birthday until the time I got into the and the one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is that people just show up and they're ready to go. They also um, think that it is I think one of the fantasies is that anything can happen, particularly in BDSM stuff. The assumption is that the dominant in the porn scene is the one that's totally in charge, and everything that the model does is at the top's whim, whether that's a femdom or another top. And that's not always the case. It's not ever the case because it's all negotiated in advance, even with negotiation forms ahead of time. It's talked about uh, with the agents as to what the limits of the model are. And if they don't fit what the director wants for the shoot, then they find someone else to be cast. And even if in the day of the shoot or if something happens, the clause in there is that if you decide that you can no longer go through with what you'd originally negotiated with, you can you can stop the shoot and you'll still get paid at least a kill fee, and then that will
Oh,
be
wait,
it.
explain kill fee because that's kind of a scary phrase.
Yeah, what a kill fee is, the killing fee is to it's an agreement to not publish the shoot can't be published. So
Okay.
say I don't want this to see the light, and so you pay a fee or you don't pay a fee. You are paid, the model is paid a certain amount, um, that they get paid even though the shoot is killed, meaning it will never it gets they it never sees the light of day or never sees the light of LCD screen or whatever it is that you kids are using to watch that these days. And so that's what a kill fee is basically it's a it's actually not a fee that's charged anyone. It's basically the rate
It's a
that the studio
it's a
pays the model.
cancellation guarantee.
Yeah, what's that?
It's a cancellation guarantee.
Yeah, yeah, cancellation guarantee. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just things sound cooler in cinema. Like extension cords are called stingers and tripods are called sticks and so everything in the because it's just a bunch of theater geeks that kind of got into cinema, at least in the production PA aspect of it. You had to create your own cool names for everything to sound cooler. So cancellation clauses are called kill fees, and
Yeah.
everything else in cinema has another cool name that sounds
So
scarier than it
the
is.
the fantasy that consumers have is that and I think this happens with um, in terms of political policy, the assumption that people who are in front of the camera are victims. Now, in any workforce, there are people that are exploited. There are any workforce, there are people who are doing jobs they don't want to, whether it's lawyers or nurses or teachers or hotel housekeeping or in adult entertainment. But people conflate the hot kinky action to that and the plot line, the fantasy, the performed power dynamic to be on the screen to be the same off screen, that these poor people were forced into doing this as opposed to having a full long lawyer form and
Right.
agents negotiating with director.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for bringing me back to the center there, because I guess that is a real assumption is that, but it's funny because my perception of I guess that's up to the viewer too, because I never really saw the models and the type of videos that I would enjoy as victims necessarily. But I'm sure that is a major assumption of people. But yeah, but that's the fantasy that you're trying to present is at least a lot of these plot lines. It's it's consensual non-consent, um, but the consensual aspect of it is hidden from the public so that they can enjoy the
So,
fantasy.
so let me ask you, for every I'm asking you to hypothetically spitball here, okay? Um, for every hour of viewable kink porn, fantasy, consensual, non-consent scene, for every hour of the action that we see, how much time is spent in the consent and negotiation and agreement making, including that which shows up in is done on the editing side. So you have 1 hour of visible. How much would you say happens that go into agreement making?
I'd say at least uh, probably depending on the model, between an hour to 2 hours just in the pre-negotiation of it, particularly if they have an agent and they're talking about what they want to do. Usually they know that it's not like a big surprise if they usually have pre-negotiated certain things that they're willing to do, because some models say that, oh yes, I like bondage, I like anal, I like this and that. And so that kind of fast forwards the consent talk a bit. But then there are forms that you fill out. The director has to have the all of the talent read it, and the talent that is bottoming states what their limitations are, and then everyone else that's in the scene, whether it's a gangbang or whether it's one-on-one or what have you, the other people that are in the shoot have to read the other person's limits and each other and agree to that. You agree as to whether it's going to be a condom shoot, a no condom shoot, or a condom optional. The director, of course, reads that, and then the crew has to read that. So that's a good, that's at least a couple of hours just in the paperwork on-site negotiation. And this doesn't even count to what they've talked about um, ahead of time. And sometimes the models and the directors will communicate ahead of time just to see if this is like a shoot that they want to do. And so that takes an additional amount of time. But in terms of for every 45 minutes you see on screen, we would shoot setup would take a couple of hours. So negotiation and stuff and the signing of the forms, that would take like an hour to 2 hours. And then the setting up the lights and just the whole production prep of it would take another couple of hours. And so we would very often not start shooting until 1 p.m. or maybe even 2 if it was a complex thing. The set would have to be dressed and all this. And then the shoot wouldn't finish until sometimes 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. And that's pretty typical. So you're talking about an average, and the Kink University shoots tended to be longer too because we were doing it instructionally wise. We weren't just like doing straight scenarios. But yeah, so but in the midst of that happens ongoing consent in the midst of it because before taking a site, which I directed for a little bit, Sex and Submission, there are usually three setups. There's like or there's an intro and then three what are called setups. And between and those setups are there's usually the initial BDSM plot and a lot of oral stuff going on, and then the second setup is the if you're is the first penetration type of sex, and if it involves someone that has a vagina and if a front hole and a back hole, then um, they, if possible, in these shoots they would do uh, the third setup would be involving anal sex, and so at any point along there, they may decide that they don't want to do one of those setups. And so what will happen is that because, and the other thing is that the crew is aware of the limitations of the models. And so if they see the the other talent, and the other talent
Right.
has often been a loose cannon, and there are many stories of talent that have crossed the lines during and after shoots. And so because of that, the entire crew and the director has to be paying attention and of course letting the model know that they had the agency to speak up and announce if nobody's watching. So sometimes there's a lot of uh, so there are some situations where the model may just decide, and I've been in situations like this where suddenly they'll feel injured or they will feel unsafe, and they'll not want to do that, and that will totally be fine. And when they will do a workaround, and we'll decide as an editor, whether we can save the shoot uh, and still have something to publish. And there have been situations, particularly in the shoots that I directed, there are two shoots that I directed where the model had to safe out. Um, and one was a mummification video we were shooting, and sh she had to call Mercy and Red eventually to stop the shoot because she was getting overheated, which is the number one risk in mummification. And so particularly with all these lights. And so if you go see, and you'll see this, I, as a director, said, so immediately, so she read it. And so we said, okay, we're going to stop the scene and immediately get you the relief that you need. We'll cool you down, unwrap your head, and then check in on you. So attend your needs immediately. And you can see that happen because as a director, we leave the cameras, we left the cameras on. And as a director, I decided to leave that footage in the shoot. So if you go to Kink University and you check out mummification, towards the end, you'll see her call a safe word, and then you'll see us put the cameras down and everyone gets involved. The camera person and myself were both attending to her while the camera's on the sticks. Um, and so you get to see how that actually works in a shoot. And I think that was an important thing to do as an educational side to see the non-sexy backside,
Mhm.
as it were,
It's
of a
also
sexy porn shoot.
it's also profoundly realistic because this happens in private play. getting overheated in a mummification thing, um, or even just a hood that's a little too much in a warm day when someone's, a little bit under the weather. And yeah, kind of lost track from my question of estimating for every hour of performance. So it could be as many as, given, I was kind of trying to keep track of this, it could be as much as 6 to 10 hours behind every hour of porn shooting.
Oh, easily. But in terms of the specific consent check-ins and that sort of thing, I'd say 2 to 3 hours of that is focused around consent as to and
Okay.
the actions taking place.
Hmm.
So, and when a lot of people in fantasy, when a lot of people in the real world are having sex for 2 to 12 minutes at a time, uh, to imagine that at these porn shoots that are sending them out are spending 3 hours just in affirming and establishing negotiation and consent. That's pretty impressive.
Now, you mentioned about the person calling mercy or red. And in one of the things that you brought up in the prep for our conversation was the danger of red versus the power of yes. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I personally, as a player, don't like we've all if you've been in the BDSM scene for a while, and if you're new, you'll hear this once you get into it. But there's a common maxim that we use safe words. We use the safe words of red for stop and yellow for lighten up, or excuse me, or mercy, if you want to say something that's sexier than yellow, um, particularly on camera. And the trouble with that is that the reason why we have colors, for those who are new, is because a lot of people, why don't we just say no or don't or stop? Because a lot of us like to go to a very dark place on our BDSM. We like to use those words, particularly for playing in the pretext of being non-consensual, like we're doing aggressive play, um, and so to be able to
No,
be in a
Dad,
hot, sexy scene.
no. Don't tie me up and give me orgasms in just the way I want to. No.
Yeah, yeah. No, daddy, don't, or fuck you, or I'm gonna sue you, or like, the stuff that people like to say in a scene, um, is no, mommy, no. The uh, or stepmommy, no, stepmommy. The they like to go to that place as part of the fantasy, and so you set aside a word that is completely non sequitur, that's a complete non sequitur, that everybody knows is like yellow and red, and then they can stop and check in, and the comfort in that knows that your partner will stop. But what Midori was mentioning is that I have never really liked that framework of the way, because it relies on the bottom to realize that their limit is about to be crossed or has been crossed in the case of red. Um, and that's problematic in a scene, particularly when you've got all these great hormones, when you've been begging to, like, no, don't oat you out until my come, or don't do this. When you're getting into, we're already hot and turned on, particularly if you're in a dominance and submission, what we call a DS framework.
How does, okay, so how does this in private play, okay, but how does this work in terms of performance kink, right?
Right. Well, yeah. So in performance kink, just to quickly, but I think they both cross, because even in a scene, it's worse in a performance, because what happens is that it puts the onus on the bottom to realize that their limit is being approached or crossed. And if they're in a scene, they very often don't want to disappoint their dominant, and so they try to push on a little bit longer than they were comfortable. And in a performance, it's worse because you've got an audience, and you don't want to not only disappoint your top, your fellow performer, you don't want to ruin the show for the audience, and so you basically just throw yourself on the hand grenade of consent, and that is um, extremely problematic. And
Does
the
yeah.
And so the performance aspect of it, everybody, for the most part, that's why they call it performance anxiety, is in an intimate situation or BDSM situation, it's always a performance. If you're not performing for your partner, you're, yeah, I mean, you're performing in a dominant sense because you're trying to make them happy in this particular aspect. And if you have a crowd, that just amplifies it, and it makes it almost it makes it very,
Yeah.
very difficult to get out of that situation. Have you
And
experienced situations where you've had big oopsies of like all of a sudden someone didn't
yeah,
want squid ink or something, or
squidding. What are you squidding? For those of you who know me, you know the answer. Um, so stage performance, right? A little bit different than say like uh a filmed performance, because in a film performance, there's a bit of editing that can be done, right? So a little bit of my own experience. I have done styling and rigging for photo shoots and videos where I'm off on the side, and I'm doing the thing, and then there's like something that needs to get fixed. There's a little bit of ease because there's the potential for edits, right? Continuity, maybe they don't pay that much attention to. But live on stage. So let's say live on stage with Torture Garden or something, or uh, Sadistic Circus in Japan. This is live. There is no editing, and things go horribly wrong, or or something changes in the middle of things, and in performance there's a job to be done. And I know for me, if I'm on stage doing a performance, I don't want somebody who considers themselves a melting in rope person who like goes into headspace when ropes on them. I want a professional performer, preferably a circus performer, because they are tough as nails, right? And understanding that they that both of us, all the performers, need to keep in our professional heads, not lose ourselves. So the pleasure is different. So it's like consenting. I'm looking for somebody who consents to performing, not consenting to a scene if I'm on stage. I don't want somebody who's expecting a scene for them, that the two of us are two, three dozen of us are collaborating to create an experience for the audience. But there is no edit. Um, so bad thing that happened and the years and years ago. I was in Amsterdam and it was part of an artist residency thing, but at a local club. And boy, my pre-performance conversation has really changed after that one. I had somebody connect me with a friend of a friend, never a good idea, that would love to do this. And it was at a fantastic underground, seedy in just the right way club, and it's a bar. And I'm doing a bondage thing on stage, and this person, uh, local person, and I was told they had like adult industry experience as well as bondage experience. And she said she was a little bit nervous, but okay, fine, get it. Had what I thought was my standard conversation. She goes to the bathroom, she comes back, I'm tying her onto, I think, a pole, I don't really remember. And then she starts nodding off. I am naive because San Francisco, she was high. She was nodding off. She was high. And I was pissed. This is non consensual to me. And the idea that the person who's topping on stage is somehow in control of everything, no, this is equal. So I am pissed. And she went and got herself high when I told her no, right? And to that we needed to be clean for the performance. That, this is Amsterdam. I didn't know what to expect. I remember just grabbing her by the ropes and shaking her, coming in really close in performance character, going, straighten up right now, and we're getting off stage. I was pissed. I did not consent to that. It was a violation of my clearly stated conditions.
And you saw that and did the right thing. And that's an important thing to realize too, is that the audience is not worth the sacrifice of safety. So, and I think in some cases they'll even appreciate that, uh, because that's a good lesson for people to see too. Um, so yeah, I've been in situations. Yeah, that's a tough one when people. That's something I'll have to add to my own negotiations too. Is that I think we all should be more careful about the uh, the state, the chemical state of the person that we're playing with, to make sure that they're in a space to not only consent, but to continue to be aware of their own situation. So we as performers and directors and as tops, and even just in the privacy ourselves as lovers, have the responsibility to look out not just for ourselves, but also for our partner, and don't assume that they know how to do it, because a lot of people, I'm kind of this is particularly true I've noticed in the swinger community, where drugs tend to be a lot more popular, and that it when you cross the streams by introducing BDSM to that, you're going to run into the situation where people are not necessarily in a space to recognize that they are might be in an unsafe situation. And so we as tops, particularly as performers, as Midori was mentioning, need to be extra conscious on behalf of our partner.
Yeah, there are times when going to a kinky bar, I just want to hold up the bar and have a drink and watch everyone else do the freaky things. Hey, I got a question for you from someone,
Yeah.
and I'm going to couch this in terms of your professional work, not your private play. Okay? So the question is, and for performance, uh, stage and porn. Is red being negotiated as a hard all stop with no possible recovery in the scene, or is that negotiated for yellow? I'd like to know more about how Danarama negotiates or tries to negotiate for film scenes, and if they're different from non-filmed or private scenes. Private play versus your professional. I think I understand this better now. How is your safe words and signals different in or specific to your filmed work?
Right. Well, in film, the camera's running, and so you try to do stuff that is a signal to the dominant and the director, but does not alert the audience on film that something is amiss, if it is something that can be corrected in the moment. Like, for example, yellow, if you use the phrase yellow for lighten up, it would seem weird in a scene if you're on the upper floor and some model is getting flogged, and then all of a sudden she says yellow. Well, that doesn't really, well, this isn't, why would you say that in this Victorian um, girls' school setup? Like, it makes no sense to suddenly be saying a color like that. And so instead, we use the term mercy, because that way mercy means yellow. And so you can see scenes, and you can even if you watch a lot of shoots, particularly kink shoots, like on Sex and Submission, or particularly the upper floor, or anything BDSM oriented, you'll sometimes hear someone say mercy if they're having something done, particularly impact play. And that what you'll see is that mercy is yellow. And so the person, which means mercy means lighten up. And so you won't stop the scene, but you'll just like stop with the flogging, or you'll lighten up, or you'll move on to something else, and the scene will continue. And saying mercy is in the realm of it's acceptable within the fantasy of the scene. So it doesn't seem out
Uh,
of character. The
And
for a
mercy
red,
means, yeah, mercy in this case means something needs adjusting.
yeah, mercy, whatever it is, yeah. So if it's bondage, they can say mercy, and then they check in, and they can loosen up. And so you often agree as to what this means. If it's not an impact play scene, but it's a rope scene, then you agree. And this is something that's discussed with every model before they shoot. And they even do the interview ahead of time, particularly for a lot of shoots like at there are a lot of BDSM. It's pretty common practice now to have an opening interview before the shoot and a closing interview. And mostly a lot of times the opening interview isn't seen, but they still film it. And you go over what your safe terms are, where you say mercy for lighten up, and for red, it's three uh-uhs. And because that way you can have a ball gag in and this and that, and still scenes in the scene, but you're able to stop, so that it makes it a much more it makes it a much more seamless place to have to edit or to change to something else. So yeah, so you'd agree as to what that is. And I kind of like that, doing that in a play scene. But what I mentioned, Midori, I'm finally getting around to answering your question as far as why I think that the the red yellow mercy system is flawed, is because it makes the bottom uh, wait for a boundary to be crossed. And
Mm.
so, and it has them waiting for that no. And so they're pensively waiting. Are they going to reach my limit? Have they reached my limit? And so they're judging it from a very negative point. And sometimes they'll want to please the dominant, and they'll go past their own limit. And the dominant may be saying, well, uh, they they aren't saying mercy or yellow, so I guess I can do this harder. And the dominant is actually, and so you end up holding hands and crossing the boundaries together, because no one wanted to speak up that it was beyond their limitations, and then afterwards they kind of regretted it. So what I like to do instead, because because that focuses too much on the bottom to say no, I would much rather constantly check in and reaffirm consent by announcing what it is that I'm about to do. So not in a like, now you never want to, in any scene, do mid-scene negotiation for new things. Like you wouldn't, if you'd agreed to do like a rope scene, you wouldn't say, oh, you seem pretty turned on, can I stick my finger in your butt? That's mid-scene negotiate. Unless you've talked about that, that's definitely don't do that. But if you talked about it ahead of time and said, I want you to suspend me, and I'd really like it. I think, and I'm cool if you want to stick something up my butt. Um, and then, so rather than just sticking that up their butt in the middle of the scene, I like to use that and make that as part of my dirty talk. So rather than saying, is it okay if I stick something in your butt? Um, in a pansy top sort of way, you make it sexier, and you go, you can lean it, growl into their ears as your ass looks so amazing. Your ass looks like, but it needs something in it, don't you think? I bet you want this 3-inch butt plug in your ass, don't you? Your ass is just screaming for a butt plug, isn't it? Isn't it? And then you get them to say yes. And you get them to confirm that at the moment, because maybe they changed their mind. Maybe once they were suspended, they realized that they're in too much pain. They don't want it in the butt anymore. And that gives an opportunity to say no, because unless they, and then you, by getting them to, I kind of think that begging is a great way to get consent, because if they say, rather than just saying, yes, have them say, yes, stick that 3-inch butt plug in my ass right now, and and sound excited about it, and that reaffirms that consent. And what that does to me is that by announcing along the way, and this is how I play privately too, and it also makes for good on-screen porn too, announcing what I'm about to do tells people what's coming, the bottom and the audience, and also gives them an opportunity to opt out at that moment rather than just thinking they've got to stick to a previous negotiation. It also keeps them from having to say yellow once it or red once it happens, which is an even more um, embarrassing and uncomfortable situation, whether it's a performance or even in private. And the thing I like about it too is rather than waiting for the big no, uh, as in, oh, I'm gonna need to use my safe word, rather than waiting for a big no that's coming up, it makes your scene a series of progressive yeses. And I think that really adds to the sex positivity of the experience and the shoot. If the person is saying, yes, yes, stick that in my ass, or yes, definitely put your hands down my throat, and yes, definitely, pull my hair. That's by saying by announcing what you're going to do in a sexy way and having them confirm that's what they deserve, or whatever and you can couch this in a dominant in a gore situation. In Gorian language they would say, if it pleases you, sir. um, that's the way that they've agreed ahead of time um, to non
So
to give
really
consent
leaning
non-consensual sounding.
into really leaning into the affirmation
Yeah,
and and setting up signposts to indicate that you're on the right road for positive action.
yeah,
There was a little bit of side question around, is there a hard stop signal for film shoot? And I think you already addressed that in terms of like the overheating example.
yeah,
And in terms of the affirmative, so I like that your check-ins on film are, instead of going, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" still carries the role and the authority, while inside you might be going, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Outside, it's like, you desire this giant butt plug, do you not?" And you're like, "Please, I think." Inside. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, okay, so I have on uh stage, I have actually um when it's like a closely filmed stage performance, I actually do have a safe word for like absolute emergency safe word that no one would know about. Now you will all know mistress, because I deeply despise being called mistress. I hate it so much that it is the 911 emergency, call the hospital. Uh, yeah, it's the everything stops now because it takes me out of my head so fast. So nothing quite like pissing me off to get me into like, oh, there's a problem.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point for you to bring up too, is that particularly if you're new to the kinky scene, uh, as a top, we often forget that we need safe words too. We can call a scene, and we often should because because we are not as affected by subspace and uh, all the subspaces, that hypnotic sensation that
Oh,
people that are
bullshit.
yeah
Bull
we
I call bullshit on that.
you call
Because if I'm in a certain top space, I am biochemically high as a kite, you know? I'm in
yeah
top head. Yeah. And
yeah
that's the thing
great.
with, if I'm in performative um kink, I can't go there. I can get high from a job well done, an artistic high. But private play, topping, I'm high too. I get to have my safe word.
Yeah, well, we all should get our safe word. So because there are
Yeah.
times when something will happen where we're not only we're not enjoying ourselves,
Mhm.
and we have the ability to stop that too as a top. You don't have to. You are not. If this isn't a pizza restaurant, someone doesn't call up and order certain toppings, and then you deliver. Even in the if you're in the pro sworker type, you have to realize that you have the ability to say, to knock it off. And um, it's just like it's just like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds. Uh, you'll hear them occasionally say that something will not feel right in the diamond, and they'll say, knock it off. And then everyone will say, knock it off. And then they all fly away so they don't hit each other. And even if you're in a performance, you have to be conscious of the situation that it's not feeling right for you as the top. And I've had a lot of scenes that have canceled very often. Like I have limits, just like Midori mentioned one about being uh,
The person
having the
being
person
high.
being too inebriated or high. That's a hard limit for me. I also hate to break any hearts out there, but I find um, brattiness is a hard limit. It's become a hard limit for me because brattiness affects me as a top because it uh, it toys with non-consensuality for me in a way that makes it harder for me to gauge whether the person wants this or not. And so I oftentimes have called red on someone being too bratty, and that's just my own
Ah,
personal experience. So
because in a brattiness context, person being bratty, you're not able to gauge the affirmation that you need to give you the signpost to carry on.
exactly.
Okay.
And it's a lot of work. People we as dominants, we as tops, we take these class we pay $35 a head to take a class on how to do this particular skill that we forget like 2 weeks later and have to take the class again. We uh, and then we have to buy this $200 flogger, and then we have to buy this. Oh, my partner likes handcuffs, and I gotta go buy like $150 worth of leg irons and stuff. And
Hey, you know
so
what? If somebody likes receiving things, I think it's perfectly fine for them to get the tools that they want used on them. That
yeah.
also means they know where it's been.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing. I definitely would encourage. I need to find more play partners like that that
Right.
come
I
with
mean,
their own
like
kit.
imagine with rope. I mean, okay, for those of you out there who enjoy receiving rope, if you have your own rope, you know exactly where that crotch rope has been. Come on.
That's a great point. Yeah, normalize bringing your own toys because the investments that tops make, plus the investment of like lugging that shit around. Like every party that I go to, I've got like up to 50 pounds of play gear. Um, and
Yeah.
you don't know how hard it
And
is.
and and unlike a performance or a shoot, you don't have a crew to help with it of setup and all of that. So, I I want to hear some more consent learning opportunity bloopers, you know. Oh,
Right.
I got
Okay.
I got a blooper. I don't know if it's a, you know what? It is a consent thing. Actually, it actually is. It was a performance overseas, and I was with a known performing partner who had left town to go do some sightseeing. And, we got a performance scheduled. Okay, go do the sightseeing. Can you make sure to be back the uh, day before for rehearsal? Because stage performances are rehearsed. Okay, so she's like, no, it'll be fine. I'll catch the morning flight. You see where this is going.
Yeah.
And, she's in another part of the country, and flight is canceled. I had said that please, please be back the night before. No, it'll be fine. Okay. And I didn't listen to my gut. And I really wanted her there because it was a co-created performance and quite technically elaborate, with including a electric winch and a high ceiling and all of that.
Wow.
No performer.
What did you do?
I created a brand new performance. using me. So I had to create a brand new performance and with what I had, and also manage my emotion.
Yeah.
The show must go on. So I had to create a whole nother thing. And I actually
Yeah.
created a performance I'd like to be able to do again, but um, this was a situation where a specific request, I failed in negotiating my part. I didn't hold my ground. So it was not a consent incident or consent violation, but I did not stand up for my own needs.
Right. Yeah, that's an example of just what we were talking about, making sure that we stand up for needs before and during.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to think of situations that were, I think the I think the biggest, the scariest situation that I was in was probably my first or second year in BDSM, where I thought that we'd agreed to do like a hot fudge scene. And so we went and we got some fudge from the store. And the whole point was that I was going to pour it on her breast during the scene and lick it off, and it's going to be all sexy and sensual. And I handed it to the person at the power exchange who had a way to heat it up, and he put it in the microwave. And so the trouble with putting hot sauce with anything in a microwave is that it gets really, really it's like a pie where it gets boiling hot on the inside, but it can still be solid on the top. And that's kind of what happened. And so uh, one of the errors of consent is not being aware of all the problems that can be happening in something that is something that you're new to doing, or you do something a little bit different, where you both consent to something, but you're not aware of the inherent risks that may be coming with that. And when both of you are like not aware of that, then it becomes equally dangerous. And so it was quite a huge surprise when it was uh, when trying to pour the hot fudge out, and it was in kind of a performance situation, and then it wasn't coming out, and then of course the little the cooler crust on top of the hot fudge opened, and then that piping hot fudge went out all over her breast, and I immediately wiped it off my hand, um and I got second degree burns on my hand from wiping that off, very hot. And then she got some, first degree burns as well. And so spending the whole, week taking care of that, um, having a medical emergency that's a result of your naivete as to the risks involved in this was a very shocking experience. The one that you add to
Yeah.
the I'll never do that again. But that was a matter, and that's where sometimes you can only consent to things where you know what all the risks are, and you can't always compensate for the fact that there's certain things you don't have control over. Like you may not, it's hard to consent to suspension sometimes, both of you, when you're not the one who put you don't know what the safety of that eye screw is at the top, because there have been a couple of situations that I've seen where that's failed. Um, because you've trusted work that someone else has done. Just like I failed
Oh,
as a top by not monitoring and testing um, the actual temperature of by handing a jar of hot sauce off to someone to have them heat it up. I didn't do that myself, and because it was in the heat of the moment, you leave out some spaces that would have given you an
so
opportunity to ensure it was safer. And so
so what
that
we're
was
we're getting to at this point is that you cannot consent to all possible or consent or deny all possibilities, that there will always be unknown unknowns, to quote Rumsfeld, um, that even the best practice of consent and agreement making and affirmative direction can reduce the possibilities of things going pear-shaped, but cannot erase all bad things happening. So the today in as we're waking up to more of a consent culture, at kind of the as the pendulum swing is the leaning into consent as almost talismanic protection towards everything possibly going wrong, right? There are things that we cannot anticipate. So consent and limits and boundaries and affirmative practice increases the potential for a good time and reduces the potential for misunderstandings and bad times, but you cannot anticipate everything.
Yeah. Well, there's also a saying that we as pilots say is that, I mean, things are going to happen, but if we have a saying that you get experience, you get good judgment from experience, but you get experience from bad judgment. And, that's the perfect example of the hot fudge is because, that was bad judgment, but that experience gave me the ability to never do that again or have certain safeguards in place when that happens. Like someone's asking, what's a good stage substitute for hot fudge? Well, it would be uh, warm fudge that you have warmed up, like with your body, um, or pudding that is room temperature pudding, or something that is like that. So, but being able to just have somebody else heat this up for you, you have lost control of you've then become a submissive of another person's ability
Well,
to monitor temperature. So don't lose anything that is critical in that. Make sure that have
you
that you
gain
test it
this
yourself or watch it all the way through yourself. What's that?
and you gain this through bad judgment.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of learning can happen. I think this relates to a question, and we are running short on time, so I want to be conscious of that. Somebody related to that, somebody asked about we all learn from our experience. How do you incorporate lessons learned, bad judgment, into future negotiations? And I'm going to say specifically for theatrical work and performative work, do you build checklists or other tools, or is it all intuition? Now, I'm going to push back on the comment intuition because intuition is a series of nano decision making. And to your point, Danarama, of good judgment comes from experience, experience comes from intuition, bad judgments that I think sometimes people use the term intuition as some light coming up in your head. It's fast thinking and seriously nano decision making. But to the point of the person's question, how do you specifically incorporate good judgment that you gain through experience?
Well, a lot of it is in adding things to negotiation forms. I know in the links that we provided, we have a links to a presentation that Mixed Bliss and I have done, and we both provided frameworks for consent in ours. And so one of those is a checklist that I add hot fudge into that. And so if anyone mentions a desire for hot fudge, because a lot of people seem to like it, I know that I have to have a very careful talk about that and very careful control. So that's what I do with it. So, and in performances, if it's a suspension performance, I know because I've seen other people's rigs fail, I make sure that I am totally responsible for what that is. So if I didn't put that up point in, I'm going to rig something else that I have confidence in. So I'm going to throw something over a beam, or I want to make sure that I don't want anything invisible that I didn't put in there myself. And so those are the judgment things that I've learned going along. And so
That,
you basically, you basically make a checklist in your head. It's not intuition, it's learning, and it's like putting your not touching the hot stove again.
Got another question from an earlier topic, and this is about the waivers and the forms and uh, the wants, don't wants of all the performers. This person asks, I was curious about the signing of waivers. Does every model and participants have their own waiver document and others sign them, or is there a master document for everyone and they all sign that?
No, each model has their own. So,
Mhm.
and so if you've got several, and it becomes complicated because you've got to, and that's why it's really helpful for the director or the PAs or the other assistants in the crowd to be monitoring this sort of thing and look at those because when you've got, because you may have two submissives in a scene, or you may have a top and a submissive, and there may be limits on the top side that they don't want certain things being done in terms of the interaction. So every performer has their own checklist as to what they've negotiated to. So, um, and then all the performers have to read everyone else's sheets and sign it. So in the upper floor, you would have at least three submissives, and so you'd everyone on in the crew and the director and all the performers would have to read all three submissives um, forms and be able to keep them straight. That can be the
Oh,
hardest thing when you're dealing with three co-performers to know, wait, you're the one that didn't like, oh, you're the one that did. So you just have to.
oh, I got another question here from someone, and uh, I have an idea of what the answer might be, but I want to hear from you. Somebody asks, how do performance contracts differ across countries or regions of the US?
Well, that's a good question. I'd like to find out. So if you live in another region or another country, and actually, I know how things kind of work in Germany, um, and it's a little bit and again, this is all anecdotal, so it may not be de rigueur
Mhm.
um, or standard. Um, I mean, a lot of the big studios have pretty standard consent forms that they've um, everyone kind of shares stuff around, or the model say we did this or that. So, but I don't know how it changes regionally necessarily. Other than I imagine in red states there's probably less emphasis on pronouns and uh, other things. But the but in Germany, what I found, I shot in Germany. I'm actually going back to Berlin in 3 weeks to shoot again, and I was very surprised that they don't deal with consent forms so much because they trust that they will use their words and that people won't go beyond the limits if they say that. And so it's a natural, it's a it's a very it's funny because the Europeans often criticize Americans for courtship with the fact that we spend a lot of time in courtship, and they say that's the same about our consent policies, is that we spend so much time with the negotiation versus, and I think the difference is that in the culture is that they say that if when we're with a partner and they act uncomfortable or they say no or whatever they agree is not a thing to happen, they're comfortable that they will stop. But Americans have a tendency to want to drive through the yellows very fast, uh, and uh,
And then there's
and
Japan.
and step over consent and kind of take it personally. Whereas the impression of a lot of people in Europe is that Americans are much harder to get to say stop, and so that's why consent is more important in advance.
And then there's Japan, where it is not a consent culture, and shut up and take it is kind of the norm. And for those of you who are interested, I have an article in, I think it's Zipper magazine, where I discuss the dark side of kink, BDSM, and sexuality in Japan, where negotiating before a scene professional or private, really doesn't happen. Now, to the question of the contracts and performance agreements, the statement would also, the question would also assume that there is a codified regional or even national contracts on these things. There isn't. You get a company like Kink, yes, because there's a whole floor of lawyers, but you get, um, say, like a where I started off in the underground nightclubs of San Francisco, back in those days, remember where we got our start? I remember just like being asked about, hey, do you want to do a performance with me? Or um, being approached by a producer saying, hey, you want to do a performance for us. And the contract, if you will, is when, where, and how much. If you even get that in writing, it was good.
Yeah.
But you get a company like companies you've worked for, larger firms that can hire lawyers, and you get things more codified. So, and then there's also legal pressure. There's been some conversation in the chat around the 2257 and all that, but that's a bit outside of the scope of our conversation here. But legal and policy pressures also make for, well, greater clarity for performers, and you also get sex worker advocate organizations, though advocacy is can get difficult for advocacy organizations, or the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, who is trying to give more tools for performers, whether they're topping or bottoming, to have greater legal agency and autonomy, as well as for the actions on stage. So for those of you who are interested, you might want to look into the efforts of the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. We are coming towards an end here. Um, so what's one big lesson that you've learned as a stage and performance professional that you would like people to take away for themselves, whether
Yeah,
professional or
that
personal?
is the one thing that has always been true in performance and every scene is that it will never go as you expected it. And therefore, you need to always be paying attention. So go into every scene that you do knowing that shit's gonna change and you're gonna have to improvise in a safe situation. And sometimes the change is welcome and it becomes more fun. It's not just a matter of threat. But the whole point is that you need to pay attention, not only for the negative potential aspects of them not being able to withstand or them getting into an unsafe situation, but to also pay attention for the opportunity that things may be able to be even more enjoyable. And so that's just it. Expect that
Yeah.
things will change, so pay attention.
So is that I usually ask for homework. Is that the homework for people?
Yeah, that would be my homework is what I think would be useful is to go back in your own memory, particularly if you've played before, and forward if you next time you play, is take note of what your expectations were. And I think Midori, you have a fantastic question that I always quote in my negotiations, which is, how do you want to feel at the end of our scene? And you've got these other situations. I think that's an important question to ask. Um, and what I would like you to do is look in your own history about where your actual scene changed from your expectations and what you can learn from that. And going forward, take an active record in your head of what you expect your scene to be, not only from negotiation, but from your expectations and how you want to feel, and compare it and see if they matched up and see what changed. An after action report.
That is a great homework. And yeah, that's great homework because there's a point in which something changed. Yeah. Um, when are you and I, going to be in the same place so we can sneak off and go have a drink?
Well, I know that I'm going to be performing. I think you are also too teaching at the Guild of Deviated Standards in Denver. Is that true for you as well?
Oh, I don't know if I'm
That's
going to be.
August. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
that's the 4th of August. Um, and Yeah, and I'm sure we can find something else. And are you going to be at any Dark Odyssey events, such as
oh,
Surrender, coming in the
I
fall?
unfortunately I have
We usually
elder
have
care
another
that I
thing in
need to attend
Chicago that
to.
have.
No, yeah, there is an event in Chicago, but actually just tell us about where people can see you live coming up and where they can find you virtually. Where do they find
Well,
you?
virtually find me, the best way to see what my schedule is because I'm currently revising my website thanks to the help of Little Fox. And so my current calendar is not up to date as we kind of do the coding on that, but that will be available soon. But the most immediate way to get in touch to see what I'm up to is see what I'm going to on my FetLife. If you're on FetLife, I'm Danarama. That's all A's. And you can check out the events that I'm going to. I only put events that I'm going to that I'm actually going to, um, and but I'll see some interested in going to things that I may be going to, but otherwise just supporting my fam. Uh, the other thing too is my Twitter account. I'll forever dead name it. So it's Danarama SF. Make sure you put the SF on the end of it for San Francisco because uh, that will be uh, that will be so just look me up on there because anytime that I'm doing a show, I'll definitely promote that there because it's easy to do from my phone. I don't have to go on the laptop and I'll do my schedule do on my website, but I can always
And
use my thumb to update the public
are
on
you
my Twitter or
are you
Instagram.
still doing private lessons?
I am doing private lessons, so reach out to me there through I don't know if my DMs are open on Twitter or whatever you kids are calling it these days. Um, I can probably open my DMs, but definitely my DMs are open on FetLife if you're on FetLife. And if not, just send an email to me and
Your
I'll get the
your
email at
your
dan
fans. Oh, go on.
at creativebdsm.com.
Your
And
fans are also asking if you are on Blue Sky.
I have a Blue Sky account, but I don't use it because I don't like the fact that they are the 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 ability to limit your audience is not up to spite for what I'd like to be. It's basically everyone can see your shit. Um, and even though the platform is great, I just don't like the privacy controls on it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, and because there's some things that I like to control my audience for. Um, but yeah, so but yeah, but that may change. And like I say, things are changing and we'll have to pay attention.
And you also did a class for my Patreon.
Yes, that was
And
fun. So
that video is still over in my Patreon, so you can check that out. It's protocol.
right.
Yeah.
So a fun, yeah, protocol is it's a whole lot of fun and I'm not going to ramble about that. Check it out.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Check it out. It's over in my Patreon. And speaking of my Patreon, I want to thank my Patreon supporters because having a Patreon supporters allows this to be free. So thank you. And again, consent, tiny word, seems simple. It's not. It is difficult, but it's so nuanced. It leads to greater joy and pleasure making and just a better world if we are, well, and leaning into the affirmation of I'm liking this is good. So let's keep working out on our building our consent muscles. And soon I will have another person for Consent Dojo, but Danarama, thank you, thank you for being here. And for those of you who are here live, thank you so very much. Um, yeah, and this is fantastic. So keep building your consent muscle, y'all.
Great. Thank you again so much, Midori. And remember, consent, one of the best things it does is it ensures future play with the same partner.